Hello guys, welcome back to another programming tutorial. Today I am going to be teaching you how to create a random number guessing game in C++. In this tutorial, I am going to include the assumptions that we are going to use for this program. Then I'm going to use a diagram to understand the concept of the program. Then I'm going to create an algorithm so that we have all the steps for the program. And finally, we're going to create the actual code. So let's get started! As I said, we are going to start by creating the assumption list. The first assumption is that we're not going to use classes. We could use classes, but for this program right here, we are not going to be using any classes because it's easier and faster. The second assumption is that we are going to take in user input. And the third assumption is that we are going to be using rand and srand. These are very important for generating random numbers, so we are going to use these two to create unique random numbers. Since we are done with the assumptions, we know what we are going to be using in our program, so we can jump ahead to the diagram. In this program, we are going to use random seeds in order to generate random numbers. If we were using the same seed all over again, the numbers wouldn't actually be random. So therefore, for this program, we are going to imagine that we have a bucket with seeds inside. Now, we don't know exactly what kind of seeds we have here. Let's imagine that we have a lot of different seeds that we mix together in here. So we have apple seeds, we have cherry seeds, we have pear seeds, and so on. And then we also have a piece of land in our backyard that we want to plant the seeds onto. So we are planting the seeds into the land. And now since we mixed the seeds in the bucket, we're not really sure what seed is going to be planted where, because we're just going to drop them randomly on the land. So we are going to get random trees, which are going to be, in our case, the numbers. So in the end, we are going to have apple trees, pear trees, and so on. And the seeds are going to be a seed, that's actually what it's called in C++. The land is basically the program. And the trees are going to be the numbers. And as I said, we want unique numbers all the time to have an actual guessing game. Now that we are done with the assumptions in the diagram, we can go ahead and create the algorithm. These are going to be the steps that we are going to be using in order to create our program. For step number 1, we are going to prompt the user to enter a range. This is a minimum and a maximum for the random number to be generated in. Then, jumping into step 2, we are going to use time, the time function with srand in order to generate unique seeds or always random seeds, because if we're using anything else, it's not going to be changing all the time. However, time is something that always changes, so time is the right seed to be using in order to have always changing seeds. For step number 3, we are going to use rand. So we need to use both. We're going to be using these two together up here in step number 2, and then in step number 3 are going to use rand with the formula. And the formula is rand modulus max minus min plus 1 plus min. So this is the formula that is going to create the actual number, the number that's going to be randomized, the result, or the tree in our diagram. For step number 4, we are going to prompt the user for a guess number. We are going to be using cin because we are only taking in integers. We do not need anything else. If we were taking in words or sentences, we could have used getLine, but for this case, cin is perfect. For step number 5, we are going to check if user input matches the random number. Onward, we have to decide whether the number was found or not. So for no, we will have to do more steps. For yes, we just have to display a temp number, and whichever that is. And then for that, we're going to need a counter, of course. And then we're just going to display number found. It is, and then we're going to display the number. So of course, for displaying the number, we're going to need an actual variable to hold the number back here in step 3, where we have said that the formula is going to put the generated number into our variable, because we need to remember that variable in order to see whether it is the actual number that the user guessed or not. So for no, we have more steps to do. And in this case, we're going to go to step 6. For step 6, we are going to compare the number. With the guess of the user. And from here, we have to do more steps. But let's move on to the next page because this one is full. Let's jump to step 7. In this step, we are going to imagine that we have two variables that hold the actual numbers that we created. The first one is R for the randomly generated number, and the second one is guess for the guessed number that the user entered. Now you can name these whatever you want, but I'm just naming them this way because it is easier for me to remember whatever I put in them. And so we have these two. And now we're going to perform comparison between these so that we can see whether we have to guess higher or lower. So that's the options that we have now. For this, we are going to use an if-else statement. So we're going to have if and else. So we're going to say if guess is lower than the actual number, tell the user try higher. Else, if guess is greater than the actual number, tell the user to try lower. So this is basically what we are going to need to perform the comparison. Now again, we need to take in user input in every case, and for this we are going to just include cin again. We are going to include a cin statement in here for guess, because we're taking it again in order to check if it's correct. And now we need to have another step, which is actually going back to the previous step, containing the comparison of the guessed number with the generated number. So for step 8, we're actually just going back to step 6, or it's actually step 5. And so this can be accomplished by a loop. So we're just going to say with a loop. And we're going to put steps 5 through 8 into this loop in order to continuously check until we finally find the number that was generated. And then for the final step, we can just include another question for the user, asking, do you want to play again? And the user can input Y for yes and N for no. And this is basically going to be like a bigger loop. Containing everything. And this is basically going to allow the user to keep playing and not stop until they decide to stop. So to make it more of a real game. Now, for the last part of our tutorial, we are going to write the actual code. So we are going to start by including the libraries. We need IOStream for I/O. And then we also need ctime. This is going to seed our program with the time seed. Or function. And then we are also going to include stdlib.age. This is going to help you with a lot of stuff, and it's usually good to use it. I generally use it to make my program in color, to display different colors, but that is optional. So it's not necessarily something that you have to do, but it's a nice thing to do if you're writing like a game or something, the code for a game. So it's optional. Then of course we are going to be using namespace, std, and that's just going to make everything easier. Let's jump to main. As I said, we're not using classes or anything, so everything is going to be into the main file, main.cpp. And now we are going to create a heading. You can create one, you can just leave it, whatever. And we're going to say cout guess game. And now we are going to create the first loop. We're going to say while 0. This is basically going to run all the time for as long as the user wants. And then we're going to have the boundaries for the number. Remember that in our algorithm we stated that we need boundaries. So we're going to create two boundaries, int min and max. And now we're going to ask the user to enter the minimum and the maximum. This can be done this way, or you can just assign numbers. So you can just say int min equals 0, int max equals 2000. You can do it however you want, but this is just more funnier, and more interesting for the user. So the user is just going to input the numbers, and then we are going to be using these for our random formula. Now we need a counter in order to count the attempts, so we're going to say integer, so it's of integer type, int attempt equal to 0. We are setting it to 0, but then when we display it, we're going to say cout attempt plus 1. I usually like starting at 0. You can do it at 1, but it's just nicer to start with all your counters at 0 so you don't get confused, at least for when you start out with programming. Now we are going to be using the time function. Notice that I'm not using the rend function first. I'm using the srend function first with the time seed inside. So it's going to be srend. Remember when I told you we need this one in order to create unique seeds for the program? So we're going to put time inside. This is going to be always unique and always changing. And then inside time we're going to put null, or you can just put 0. Either way is going to be fine. And then we're going to create a number. As I said, I'm going to say this is r for me, so r is going to be equal to rend. That's the rend function over here. And then we're going to use the modulus to put in the formula, to apply the formula that I just gave you in the previous steps. And we're going to say max minus min plus 1, and then everything plus min. And then we're going to create another variable for the guess number. This is going to be called my number, or my num actually. I'm sorry, num, not mom. Okay, my num, and this is going to be the guess number. And then we're also going to create another variable of type character to put the option to exit or stay. Next, we are going to create another loop, the inner loop. But let's move on to the next page so we can have more room. Now, in the second loop, we're going to put again while 0. And in this one, we're going to prompt the user to enter a number within the range. I'm sorry, cout. Now you can customize this however you want. I'm going to do it this way, and I'm going to actually tell the user what the range is, so min and max. But you can just tell them enter the number within the range, because since they are the ones who input the range, they should be able to tell what the range is. And then we're just going to take in the input, which is going to be the mynum variable that we just created earlier. It's time to display the nice heading to let the user know what attempt they are at and what number they guessed. So we're just going to say something like cout attempt colon, and we can say just put the variable of the attempt +1 if you initialize it at 0, and then just tell the user what the number is. So that is going to be whatever you named it here, mynum. And you can also include like a little space here so that it's not attached together. It doesn't look really nice, and it wouldn't be clear once you do a lot of them. So you just put a mynum and then you're done. Now it's time to check the actual number against the guessed number, because that's the whole purpose of the game, to see if you actually guessed right or not. So if, and now what I was thinking about was that I would only give the user a certain number of attempts, so you can't guess infinitely many times. You can just guess a certain number of times. So you can say something like, if attempt is less than, I don't know, whatever number of attempts you want to give. I want to give the user only 5 attempts, and since I initialize this at 0, I'm going to say less than or equal to 4, and then we're just going to say break. This basically tells the program to end if the limit was reached. Next, we are going to check if the number is in range. So now I'm doing a certain series of checks that you don't necessarily have to do, but is useful for you, because the user might enter something that's not in the range, even though he or she is told to enter a number within that range. So you want to make sure that you're checking for errors, because if it's outside the range, your program is going to behave in just a really frantic way. So you don't want that. You want to make sure that every error is taken care of. So now we're going to say if mynum is greater than max, or mynum is smaller than min, cout out of range. Please enter again. And now, in order to enter again, you can just say cin mynum. So you don't have to have a loop, you can just make this statement and have the cin statement again with the same name of the variable that you used up here. So just display again the attempt, because this is theoretically not really displayed unless it works. So you just display the same thing as in here, up here. So you just say attempt, attempt plus 1, mynum, okay, so once we've done this, we know for sure that the number is in range. So unless you have a really funny user that wants to play games with your game, and they will keep doing the same thing, entering numbers that are out of range, you should be pretty good after this step. So now we're going to check if the guessed number is equal to the actual randomized number. So we're going to say if mynum is equal to r, cout done, and then you're done. But if not, you need to say else if mynum, so that's the number that we guessed, is greater, let's just say start with greater, then the randomized number, we're going to say cout guessed lower. And then we're going to have another else statement, because we need to check every possibility before we do anything else. So we're going to say else if the my number is lower than the randomized number, we're just going to say the same thing as here, just guess higher. So it's going to be the same format, just guess higher. We're almost done with this if-else statement, so we can go ahead and do the last portion of it. So this is going to be the else break statement. So that's just like in case nothing else worked, just do this thing. Okay, let's move on to the next page. Now on this page, we're going to continue with the remaining portion of the program. And if you remember earlier in the code, I told you that we need to set a certain number of attempts in order to make the game more challenging. So now we need to increment the attempt number. And we're going to close a bracket here and again in here, because we had two loops. And then we need to if the user lost or if the user won. So for that, we need to see if the number of attempts is done, if the user used all of his or her attempts, and if the number is equal to the generated number or not. So we're going to say if attempt greater than or equal to 4, in my case, because I only wanted to have 5 attempts, and the attempt was initialized at 0, which means that there are 5 attempts. And then we're going to say and my num, so that is the number that a user guesses, is not equal to r. In our case, r is the randomized number. We're just going to say you lost. And we can say used all your tries. Okay, this is optional, but yeah, you can give the user a funny message or anything if you want, or you can just say you lost. And then we're going to go ahead and do the else statement, which is going to handle the portion where the user wins, because there are going to be cases where the user wins. So we need an else statement. Else cout, yay, you won. And then we're done with this portion. And we need to create the next while loop, which is going to allow the user to play again. So another while loop with 0 in parentheses is going to just allow the user to tell whether or not they want to play again. So for this one, you can check if the input was right or not, or you can just assume that a user is going to input a right option, and then we can just go ahead. For me, I'm just going to assume that the input is going to be correct, so we're going to say cout play again, and we're going to say y or n. So we're going to assume that the user is going to input either y or n. You can create a test case in which you're assuming that the user might not input it right, but for this case, to simplify the program, we're just going to assume that the user inputted it right. So we're going to check the option. So first say cin option, and then we're going to say if option equals n, or option equals capital N. You have to test for both if you want to have an efficient game. We're going to say break. But before that, you can just give the user a nice goodbye message. So you can say, before the break, you can say something like cout, thanks for playing. And then break. And then else, we can say else if option equals y, but we can just assume that we have two options, so else is just y. And then but you know, for the sake of making the program work perfectly in each case, we're just going to say else if option equals y, or option equals capital Y, cout, and line. And this is basically going to return to play again. So it's going to continue with the game. And then we're just going to say return 0. Now again, this program, this final loop, could have had another test case in which we said if option is not equal to n or option not equal to y, then break and ask the user to enter again, or break. But usually you just ask the user to enter again, because if you break, the program is going to stop there. So just ask the user to enter again. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments down below what kind of other programming videos you want, and I'm going to come back with more programming tutorials. Bye! Since you're still here, please don't forget to like this video and to subscribe to my channel if you're new. I am always updating the channel with more programming tutorials and interesting videos. So also click the notification bell so you get more videos on time. Bye again.